"Your ticket, please," the flight attendant told me. I handed her the ticket, which I had been twirling in my hand for an hour. She nodded approvingly, took a piece of paper out of her pocket, folded it in half, placed the ticket inside, and gave it to me. "Have a nice flight," she said encouragingly. I walked on board, found my seat, and plopped down into it. Having put the ticket in my bag, I looked at the piece of paper that the flight attendant gave me. It turned out to be a hastily scribbled note. I quote the exact text, following these rules. If you want to survive, first, without discussing this note with anyone, you need second. After reading the rule, look at the time. From that moment, they will begin to act. Third, during the first hour of the flight, do not talk to anyone. Fourth, in the second hour of the flight, you can talk with passengers, but under no circumstances look out the window. Fifth, if you hear a child crying, run like a bullet to the toilet. Sixth, if the screen on your in-seat TV goes dark, turn away from it. Seventh, in the third hour of the flight, the pilot will make an announcement. Follow his instructions. Eighth, in the fourth hour of the flight, get up from your seat and don't sit on it again. Ninth, at the fifth hour of the flight, a hunter will begin to pursue you. Avoid meeting him. You yourself will understand who the 10th is. When the pilot announces landing, run to the exit and open the door. 11th, behind the door, you will see a black abyss. Jump into it. Giggling. I reread the rules. They handed out such pieces of paper to all the passengers, or they chose me alone as a random victim for this prank. For fun. I looked at the time, 19:30. A young man came up to me, sat down in the next seat, and buckled up without saying a word. I glanced at him and saw that he was holding a laptop bag in his hands. Great, I thought. He will mind his own business and won't bother me. The guy looked intently somewhere in front of him. I hammered a bolt onto it and started having fun with the TV in the seat. Soon the pilot announced takeoff. The plane began to pick up speed, and the force of gravity pressed me into the seat. A second later, the giant steel bird rose into the air before flying. I'm a little nervous, but this time my stomach actually twisted from excitement. Large drops of sweat appeared on his forehead. An inner voice persistently told me that I was in mortal danger. I threw the bad thoughts out of my head, attributing the anxiety to a stupid note. I read some crap, and now I'm freaking out for no reason so that I can fly on a plane from this company again. I sat back in my chair and tried to relax. Suddenly, my neighbor touched me on the shoulder. I jumped as if I had been shocked. Despite the thick jacket, I perfectly felt the icy touch of his heavy hand. I turned around and looked at my neighbor. There was something wrong with his face. You know, sometimes in expensive clothing stores, they display very realistic mannequins. They seem to look like real people, but artificial facial features make them look like dolls. Same with this guy. I can't say what exactly bothered me. Maybe it was all about the huge eyes and wide pupils, or maybe it was the nose that had shifted somewhere to the side, or maybe it was the unnaturally long and thin lips. Hard to say. The thought came to me that this was not a person at all, but someone who was carelessly pretending to be one. And then the neighbor spoke. "Hello, are you wearing headphones?" he asked. "Sorry for the stupid question. I wanted to ask. Should I give you some headphones?" Both of your questions are kind of moronic, I thought, and looked at my neighbor in complete bewilderment. His voice turned out to be quite normal. A human guy. Of course, he's a fool, but it's okay. I would continue to think so, if he hadn't asked the next question. "Do you mind if I cut off your hand? Do you think you'll like it?" I kept not so much from the essence of the question, but from the casual tone in which the stupid guy asked this question. Suddenly, the first rule popped into my head. Don't talk to anyone during the first hour of the flight, and I decided to remain silent. The rule is not the rule, and this schizoid bothered me so much that in principle I would not talk to anyone. He stopped staring at me, took his laptop out of his bag, and started working. I slowly looked at his laptop, and what I saw left a lump in my throat. On the screen in full size, there was a photo of me sitting on the plane by the window, and that's it. I looked at the keyboard. It was not an ordinary keyboard at all. Instead of the usual letters, the buttons had symbols that I had never seen in my life. It finally dawned on me that these rules were not a joke at all. Trying to digest what I saw, I was lost in thought and therefore did not notice how, out of nowhere, a flight attendant appeared next to us. "Young man, is your neighbor bothering you?" she asked me. "Yes," I answered, and the next moment I froze in a daze. Absolutely everyone in the salon turned around at once and stared straight at me. The corners of their mouths slowly rose almost to their eyes, forming an unnaturally wide smile, and bloody tears flowed from their eyes. I literally sank into the seat. What a second ago was an ordinary flight, instantly turned into a fierce nightmare. Even the flight attendant who tricked me into talking to her stared at me with bulging eyes. Without making a sound, I waited in horror that they were about to attack me, but nothing happened. The seconds dragged on like minutes, and the creatures just sat motionless and stared at me. When the shock passed and my heart stopped beating wildly, I began to think about further actions. Suddenly, the PA system started working and an indifferent, dry voice was heard in the cabin, which made the hair on my head stand on end. The pilot said, "Dear passengers, the plane enters a zone of turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." After this announcement, the passengers who were staring at me suddenly turned away in unison and continued going about their business. The situation around became normal again. I was ready to take what happened as a bad dream, but in the meantime I looked at my neighbor's laptop, saw my photo, and realized that all the fun was yet to come. This weirdo was typing text on his unearthly keyboard and carefully examining the screen. But the text, of course, was not displayed anywhere. I reread the rules and paid attention to the seventh one in the third hour of the flight. The pilot will make an announcement. Following his instructions, I immediately reached for the phone and was relieved to see that it was only the first hour. A thought flashed through my head. Either the rule I broke somehow changed the course of events, or the note did not stipulate all possible options for the development of these events. I was desperately counting on the latter because otherwise the precious piece of paper, which was my last hope for salvation, would have been useless. A sharp jolt brought me out of my stream of thoughts. The pilot did not lie about the turbulence zone. The plane began to shake. I wanted to look out the window. The rule prohibited looking into it only in the second hour of the flight, so I boldly pulled back the curtain and was immediately speechless. It was pitch black outside. I peered into the endless blackness and saw how the darkness swayed in light gusts, like smoke. I had no doubt that if I stuck my hand out the window, I would be able to touch it and it would feel like expensive velvet. Looking at the light of the side lights, I saw that it was spinning in the darkness like a whirlpool and melting somewhere in the distance. Simply put, the abyss was like an ocean of thick ink. I felt like I was crawling through a giant worm's hole or falling into a black hole. It's strange how a plane can fly so calmly in space, where, according to all the laws of physics, it should have been flattened a long time ago, I thought. This question remained unanswered. There was something in the black ocean overboard that fascinated and hypnotized me, and it took remarkable willpower for me to look away from the window. I looked at the time, and my heart stopped for a second during those couple of minutes that I looked into the abyss. A whole hour passed on the plane. By that time it became clear that the course of events on this plane was completely disrupted, and the rules were no longer of any use, but the illusion of salvation did not leave me, so I still decided to follow them to the end. Suddenly the screen on my TV went dark, and a second later I heard a child crying. I instantly understood what was happening, jumped up from my seat and rushed to the toilet. I was rushing between endlessly long rows of seats when suddenly some passenger ran up to me, blocking my path. I stared at her. A sweet girl looked at me with hope and horror in her eyes. She clenched her tiny hands into fists. Her body was shaking violently at her chest. Great mental powers were not required to understand. The man is scared to death. "Hello? Are you stuck here too?" she asked, stuttering. "Yes." "Did you also give you a list of rules?" I asked. "Yeah, but I lost it. Can I look at yours?" It flashed through my head, everything that I had experienced today. I expected a catch from anything. The mind was ringing all the bells and demanding to run as quickly as possible. But the despair in the passenger's eyes touched my heart. Overcoming myself, I gave her the treasured list. The girl showered me with gratitude, quickly glanced at the rules, and, to my great relief, returned them. I finally found a real person. "My name is Maria," she said. "Very nice, Vitali. I'll be honest, I've already broken one rule, and I think that's why everything went awry. But we still have no other options. For now, we'll continue to follow the rules, and then come what may." The other passengers scare me. It seems to me that they are not people at all, Maria said somehow, surprisingly calmly. The inner voice raised the alarm again. This girl calmed down too quickly. She's not a person either. She's just skillfully disguised. But I quickly dispelled all doubts, because Maria's face, unlike everyone else, was absolutely normal, and her strange behavior was easily explained by the total cruelty that she, like me, had to endure. A child's scream again pierced the silence of the salon. We rushed to the toilet, locked ourselves inside, and sat on the floor to catch our breath. With every second, the piercing scream became less and less human. And at the end, it reached such a high frequency that the eardrum in my ear burst and blood flowed out. Maria just sat on her haunches and didn't even think about covering her ears. I apparently have very acute hearing, I thought, but the crying soon stopped, and the pilot's indifferent voice was heard again from the public address system. "Dear passengers, please everyone go to the front of the plane." The passengers continued to sit, reclining comfortably in their chairs, and did not even think about getting up. I looked at Maria. She nodded at me approvingly, and we went to the bow. When we got there, I noticed that the door to the pilot's office was open. I cautiously crept inside and noticed two things. Firstly, there was no pilot there, and secondly, the windshield offered a view of an eerie landscape. There, far below, red scorched earth could be seen. It was cracked from the terrible heat and dryness. Volcanoes spewed fountains of fire into the sky, covered by a veil of thick scarlet clouds. Lava flowed instead of rivers. There was no trace of vegetation. Here and there, a cluster of concrete houses could be seen, very similar to peculiar cities. I had no idea where we were going. I was very scared, and then the worst thing happened. Maria suddenly laughed. I felt her nails pierce my jacket and slowly dig into my skin. And then she leaned towards my ear and whispered in an inhuman voice, "I am a hunter." I slowly turned my head and realized that Mary's image was just a disguise. Instead of neat nails, sharp yellow claws pierced my shoulder. The hunter's skin was white. The eyes, nose, and mouth on her face swapped places with each other. The adrenaline rush gave me strength, and I, leaning back on this evil spirit, pushed it out of the cabin. The creature did not expect such a setup and let me go. Having seized the moment, I gave in. But I wasn't going to give up either. I won't describe our catch-up. I will only say that the passengers sat like idols and did not pay any attention to us. I was starting to run out of steam when suddenly the pilot made the announcement again. "The plane is landing." The creature looked at me one last time and ran away. I rushed to the exit, opened the door, and fell out. Looking around, I saw a huge sun in the sky, hanging directly above the ground. The heat emanating from it was unbearable, and I decided to take refuge in the shade of the nearest building. When I got there, I collapsed on the hot ground. Welcome to hell, lost soul. I looked at the source of the sound and saw a man in a tuxedo. He stood over me and looked at me intently. "Hell?" I asked and stood up. "Land?" "Yes. Hell. However, you are an uninvited guest here. We usually keep track of who's supposed to get here, and you're not among them. But it's okay that this happens. You can even return to your world. But it is not exactly. So, just in case, I'll tell you what you'll be doing in the next eternity. First, you have to work. You see, human souls are a powerful source of energy that we use to maintain the barrier between your world and ours. Suddenly, an amorphous creature made of bright white light appeared in front of us. The man in the tuxedo and this something exchanged a couple of phrases in some incomprehensible language, after which the creature disappeared and the man turned to me. "Vitali, you were allowed to leave hell. It's a pity, of course. We just met and you're already leaving. I'm sorry that everything came out so chaotic. You can come back to life." The man snapped his fingers and the world around him began to distort. I don't know how much time passed, but I was sitting in the airplane seat again. The numbers on the phone clock were 1913. I was given a second chance and I was not going to waste it. The flight attendant and other passengers started shouting at me. At some point, my idiot neighbor put his head on my lap and stared at me with huge eyes. But I was unshakable. At 5 o'clock, the hunter appeared. It was Maria again. This time I won. She never caught me. Soon the life-saving announcement of landing was heard. I jumped out of my chair, rushed to the exit, opened the door, and, as it was written in the note, jumped into the abyss. I woke up in a hospital bed. As it turned out, I was hit by a car. My whole body was broken. No one expected me to survive. The doctor came to me and said that I died for 3 minutes, but life miraculously returned to my body. It took me a lot of time for rehabilitation and recovery, but in the end I was able to return to normal life. Thank God everything ended well. I was on vacation with my family. My daughters were 3 and 5 years old. We were on a brand new plane. About an hour into the flight, someone ahead of us fainted and they called for medical assistance. I didn't think much of it as these things happen. About another hour later and I am feeling very unwell. I stand and go to the galley to see if a lavatory is free. They are both taken. Next thing I know, I'm lying on the floor and my face and leg really hurt and the flight attendants are putting ice down my back. Apparently I fainted and my face knocked the flight attendant's phone off the wall. I fell in such a way that I got a radial fracture in my left tibia and a class 3 sprain in my left ankle. I ended up lying on the floor for 2 hours when my wife woke up from her nap and realized I was still gone. She came back and I guess I was in shock and shivering. She told the flight attendants to get me blankets. They had never thought to ask me if I was traveling with anyone, and I was so out of it. As the flight went on, more passengers kept fainting or getting sick. One man fainted in the galley next to me, but because I was there, they were ready for him and made sure he went down easy. The flight attendants all laughed and said, I was probably just a nervous flyer. I fly all the time for work. With about 2 hours left in the flight, they said they wanted to do meal service and told me to go back to my seat. I tried to protest, but they were not backing down, so I walked back to my seat on a broken leg, a severe ankle sprain. Within seconds of returning to my seat, I went back into shock from the pain and passed out again, this time vomiting all over myself and wetting my pants. My 5-year-old daughter was next to me and was absolutely mortified. My 3-year-old slept through the whole ordeal. Turns out this model of plane had an issue with burnt oil getting into the cabin through the air circulation. This made passengers sick and faint, so that would be my scariest flight story. Hi, I'm Bob, 2006, flying direct from Philadelphia to Rome. No delays, everything is smooth, and we take off just fine. 2 full hours over the Atlantic, the pilot comes over the speaker and says we're losing tire pressure and we won't be able to make it to Rome. In order to have a safe landing, we need to turn around and go back to Philly. Completely sucks. But you understand, because it wouldn't be safe to keep going. Some time goes by and the pilot comes on again and says that we won't make it to Philly, so we need to land in Boston. We land, and they tell us they're just going to do some maintenance and we'll be on our way again. Pretty miserable at this point, because we've been on the plan for about 4 hours and we're nowhere closer to our destination. Time goes by. We're still on the plane. They tell us this airport doesn't have the tools they need, so they're officially canceling our flight. It's late in the middle of the night at this point, but rather than put everyone up in a hotel, they set up cots in the terminal for the entire plane. Needless to say, no one is sleeping because everyone in on the phone trying to figure out new flights. Morning comes and we're still no closer to a new flight, so we venture into Boston, bags in tow, to find some breakfast. Head back to the airport later and stand in line at customer service for 5 hours to try and rebook. Finally get a flight for that evening, pop a sleeping pill because I've been up for God knows how long at this point, and pass the fuck out for 9 hours until we finally land in Rome. Miserable. My name is Adam in the 2008, traveling with a group of 60 from the local high school from Philadelphia to Auckland, New Zealand, and Sydney, Australia. Multiple layovers because the tour leaders were trying to save money. First stop is somewhere in North or South Carolina. Major thunderstorm as we're about to take off, so we sit on the plane for about 3 hours. We land at our second location in LA with only minutes before our next flight. Entire group runs through the airport to try and make it, but we missed it by about 10 minutes. Still blows my mind that they didn't wait for 60 people who were only minutes away. Anyway, that's that. Now, as you can imagine, it's almost impossible to rebook one flight for 60 people, so we spend almost 24 hours living in the airport trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, we have to go a hotel, so here we are in LA for over 48 hours trying to find a solution. Eventually, we're able to get a flight directly to Sydney, but no Auckland. We missed the entire week we had planned in Auckland. But I guess at least we make it to Sydney. Plenty more stories of fun delays and cancellations where that came from. I recommend not flying with me. I have bad luck. This is also why now I only fly direct at all costs and always give myself a day of padding to account for stuff like this. My worst air travel story actually happened to somebody else. I was flying from Kansas City to Las Vegas, a 3-hour flight. I was very late and I thought I missed my flight. It was Southwest, so open seating. Even though I was a list preferred they were already boarded. Walked all the way to the back of the plane and didn't see a single seat. On my way back up, I noticed one middle seat that I had overlooked. So I quickly sat down, confident I had gotten the last seat on the plane. Not 10 seconds later, some very skinny and breathless guy came on board. He had obviously been running to make the flight. He walked all the way to the back of the plane and all the way to the front, then all the way to the back again and all the way to the front. I wondered what was going to happen because I knew there were no seats. Sometimes there's a pilot flying standby or whatever, but nobody got up to give him their seat and nobody had done it for me either. So he talks to the stewardess and she does the same thing. She walked all the way to the back of the plane and all the way to the front again, and then leads them to a seat 2 rows in front of me that I actually hadn't even noticed. Keep in mind this guy was probably 6 foot tall and 140 pounds. He was a skinny guy. But there were 2 twin sisters sitting 2 rows in front of me and they were big girls. Their bodies actually touched across the empty middle seat. The stewardess told him that this was his seat. They repositioned themselves a little bit and he was able to fit himself in there, but he was unable to put the armrest down and his body was in full contact with both of them, one on the left and one on the right. He flew the entire way with his hands on his knees. The worst part was that I realized after we took off that these girls were just two members of the family, all of them very big people who had done same thing, making hapless victims of middle seat passengers. What's worse is all of them were drunk, loud, boisterous drunk, and the kind of people you can see at Walmart. They were just annoying, trashy people, and they were yelling at each other the whole flight, leaning across the guy's lap and yelling at the people on the other side of the plane. I've never felt so bad for anybody in my life. Oh man, TL. DR got trapped on a plane for 6 hours waiting for the bomb squad and had a miserable 2 days. Traveling from Chicago to San Fran many years ago, we were all on board our plane when a man flipped out and started screaming at the FAs. Apparently he had been planning / requesting an upgrade to first class and did not receive it, so he threw a loud and large tantrum and decided to exit the plane. He forgot to grab his carry-on as he stormed off, and due to federal regulations was not allowed to retrieve it once he had exited the plane. They also would not let any other passenger deplane for the same reason. No service, drinks, food, etc., was allowed while we were trapped on the plane either, for some mysterious reason. 6 hours of sitting at the gate later, after waiting for the bomb squad dogs to come and sniff his bag, we finally took off. We of course missed our connection, so ended up sleeping at the airport hoping for a 5 a.m. flight. But it was full. After finally getting to SF, we then had a fun-filled sprint to our meeting in yesterday's close and had to present without showers or anything. Second was a flight from Manila to NYC in which the poor kid behind me projectile vomited all over the back of my seat, getting a bit in my hair, immediately at takeoff. The dad had to fly covered in puke for 20 hours, so he definitely had it much worse. I felt awful for all of us,